it's my great pleasure to introduce someone who is well known to us all, and that's Alia's immediate past president, Jan Turnbull.
Thank you, Robin. I've written a little speech, so bear with me. The Donald Graves Address. What is it? Well, there's some, I know there's some words in your program, but I want to just go back a bit. We're talking about reminiscing. It was on a cold winter's day in July in 1980 at Sydney University. Actually, it was very cold. And at Sydney University, I don't know whether it heats its theatre halls now, but it certainly didn't then. But we were all sitting, it was an IFTI conference, and we were all sitting waiting. It was an afternoon session. We were waiting for this unknown speaker to come out and speak to us. After the usual introductions, this rather stocky, not very tall, tuck-headed person, remember we were in a theatre, so we were looking down at him, sort of walked across the stage with a great big smile. And he began. He said, and these words I think are going to be written in concrete forever for me or whatever, written up there. "Children want to write," he said. "For years we have underestimated their urge to make marks on paper. We have underestimated that urge because of a lack of understanding of the writing process and what children can do to control it. Without realising it, we've wrested control away from children and placed roadblocks that thwart their intentions. Then we say, they don't want to write. What's a good way to teach them?" This vivacious and engaging little short, stocky man was Donald H. Graves. His words captured all of us who were there, and we went out buzzing. He began a revolution in the teaching of writing. The focus on the process of writing and the crafting of writing were among many of the principles of Don's work. When we heard about Don's passing in September 2010, the Primary English Teaching Association, I think it might have been Stephen who first contacted me and then Robin, contacted me in my role as president of ALIA and said we should do something about this. So we talked about it. And with Don's family's blessing, I wrote to his wife, Betty, and asked whether or not we could launch something called the Donald Graves Address. It would commemorate Don's legacy that's left to us all. And many of you may not realise just how much of what we do in the teaching of writing now is based on Don's work. In Sydney in 2012, we launched the Donald Graves Address with Mem Fox as the inaugural speaker. In Brisbane, it was Professor Teresa Craven. And last year, Ralph Fletcher, who was a friend and colleague of Don's, gave the address in Darwin. Associate Professor Lisa Curvin, my friend and colleague, met Don in San Antonio, and we think it was in 2005, we think. But it certainly was San Antonio, we remember that. It's a great city to have a conference. It was an International Reading Association in those days. It's now called the International Literacy Association, thank goodness. But Don and his wife Betty were sitting having lunch, as one does at conferences, in a hotel. And we walked past. And he waved to us and invited us over. I introduced Lisa to Don and very proudly told him that she'd just not long completed her thesis in the area of teaching writing with young children. He grinned and said how pleased he was. Now, sadly, that was the last time that Don attended an International Reading Association conference. But it's not the last of his amazing words. And the impact that, on the teaching of writing. Researchers like Lisa, Dr. Lisa Curvin, is moving that information or that legacy of Don's forward into the 21st century. Now, I'll let you read all the information about Lisa's achievements and accomplishments in her early, well, really rather short career. She's achieved a lot more in her short career than I've achieved in my lifetime, basically, I think, including having 3 wonderful boys who keep her extremely busy with a schedule where she's got to organise where they are and who's got them, as well as whenever she's going to be home. But they're those beautiful boys. And, of course, a husband who also trips around the world, right, Lisa? But I'll let you read all that. I just am very proud and very honoured to introduce Lisa and to invite her to present the 2015 Donald Graves Address. Please welcome Lisa Curvin. Go for it, girl.
Thanks for that introduction, Jan. I'd like to begin by paying my respects to the traditional owners of this land. And I'd also like to say what a tremendous honour it is to be asked to give this address. My own doctoral work was indeed focused on the teaching of writing, particularly in the early years of primary school. And this has certainly flavoured what I've done in my research career ever since. I've had the great fortune of being able to travel quite a lot to the US, particularly with Jan and Brian. And while we've done some amazing adjunct work and attended some fantastic conferences, the thing that really stays in my mind about those trips is the people that they've been able to introduce me to. And I firmly remember that moment when I met Donald Graves, and Jan was talking in the background, telling him about my work and all the things that I was doing. And my memory of that moment is that he clutched my hand and he just kept shaking it, and he was looking deep into my eyes. And at the end of Jan's introduction of me, he said to me, "You're one of us." And those words have been in the forefront of my mind over the many months that I've been preparing this address. What does it mean to be one of us at this time in the teaching of writing, particularly in those early primary classrooms? So that's what I'm going to focus on today as we think about that notion of what one of us means in Donald Graves' eyes. Ningi warugu, look and ask why. I think that's such an amazing phrase to be thinking about at this time with this particular topic. And certainly at this time of curriculum change, there's ever-increasing demands of standardised assessments, the continually expanding classroom activities that we're expected to have operating in our classrooms, and the expectation to be using technology. I think it's timely to really take a moment and think about what we know about writing and the ways that we can take this knowledge into the support that we offer to young children as we're thinking about ways they create texts in their classrooms. And in doing so, I want us to think about how is it that we can nurture children as authors in our classroom? How can we ensure that they remain curious about being writers? And how can we guide children through the uncharted territory of the future to imagine new possibilities? Some pretty big questions, and I guess quite ambitious given the time that we have, but let's make a start on them. Donald Graves wrote this in 1982. Writing is an organic process that frustrates approaches to explain its operations. I need to be really upfront and explain that I'm finding it a little bit difficult to name what writing actually is when it's coupled with technology. The reality is that the texts that we create with technology enable us to create, compose, produce more than just written texts alone. And we certainly need to think about what the multimodalities look like in the digital texts that children can create, and what it is that children as authors of digital texts need to be able to manage as they construct that process and think about the decisions that they need to make about image, about audio, about movement, layout, colour, and so on. So please be patient with my struggle. For the purposes of our conversation today, I'm going to refer to writing with technology as the process of text creation. So in 1976, Donald Graves said, "People want to write. The desire to express is relentless. People want others to know what they hold to be truthful. They need the sense of authority that goes with authorship. They need to detach themselves from experience and examine it with writing. They need to share what they have discovered through writing." The same rings true for today. People want to write. I'm sure many of us have a Facebook page and can recall status updates that reflect the relentless desire people have to share, the authority with which social commentary is made, and the opportunity to share experiences. Communicating with technology is infiltrating down to the lives of young children. I know with my own children the urgency they have when they get home in the afternoons to check what their clan have written on their Clash of Clans notice board, to network with a friend to create something in Minecraft. Talking with a friend recently, she shared with me some issues that she was having with her 10-year-old daughter, who was demanding to have an Instagram account. According to her, she was the only one in her class that didn't have an Instagram account, and her mother needed to do something about it. And when she teased out what was actually happening with Instagram, children in her class were taking photos, sharing them, uploading them, commenting on each other's photos, and that then provided the stimulus for the conversations the next day at school. So I'm sure you can appreciate her concerns about being the only one without that access. And I'm sure there are mixed feelings here today about the different platforms that I've just mentioned. And I've identified these as they've come to the attention through children that I'm closely intimate with at this particular time. So let's think then about writing and what it is that we know. Back in 1976, Donald Graves identified that in the 25 years prior to that time, there had only been 156 studies of writing in US elementary schools. And of those, 80% were done through dissertation, with the majority of those being focused on finding good methods in the teaching of writing. 12% of those studies were concerned with what children did as they wrote. And while Donald Graves also acknowledged that there had been a huge influx of research in the 80s, and certainly we can see lots of amazing people that shared findings there, Graves himself, Calkins, Dyson as just examples, it's useful to think about, well, where does writing feature in research now? So with my colleagues Annette Woods and Barbara Comer, this year we have started on our new ARC project, which is looking at writing in the early years of primary school. And to begin this process, we've done a systematic literature review of a number of peak journals where we understand what happens in literacy. And this is an ongoing work, but I've just taken a snapshot of some of these journals just to give you a flavour of what it is that's happened. So if you have a look at the table that's there in front of you, in the blue column you can see the total number of articles that we have reviewed over this period of time. And in a journal such as Assessing Writing, we've looked at 90 articles. In a journal such as Contemporary Issues in Early Childhood and Education, we've looked at 145 articles. So you can see the varying number of articles that exist in these journals. We have read each one of them. In the green column, you can see how many of those articles in that archive, remembering it's for 5 years, from 2010 to 2015, the green column shows how many of those articles are dedicated to writing. And in the yellow column, you can see how many of those articles across those journals are dedicated to writing in early childhood contexts, looking at a 0 to 8 perspective. So when we look at those 38 articles in total that we found about writing in early childhood contexts, it tells us there's still much to do with what we know and understand about how children write and create text, particularly these young children. and it really needs to be a priority. We need to understand what happens to writing when it's coupled with technology. Writing's certainly undergoing a period of great change in many classrooms, and with new ways of creating text and constructing meanings with new technologies, we need to really think about and examine what this means in terms of opportunities for text creation for young children. But before we start to tease out the role of technology with text creation, I think it's useful to begin with thinking about some of those key messages that Donald gave us about children and writing. This is the view that I have on my morning walk. Sometimes it's an afternoon walk, but I spend a lot of time walking along the bike track around our local beach. Donald Graves wrote this: "Writing demands energy. Students' legs and arms become spaghetti before the terror of a blank page. Teachers' eyes close to half-mast before a sheaf of uncorrected compositions. Writing demands energy from the writer-producer and the teacher-responder." I start this section with a picture of my local walk because in the process of constructing what I'm sharing with you today, I have done so much more than just sit and write. I've spent countless hours walking along the beach, making mental compositions, recording those mental compositions. My neighbourhood think that I'm completely mad. Reading, jotting down ideas, screwing up those ideas, sitting in front of my laptop, staring out the window, thinking I have nothing to say, telling people I have nothing to say, visiting classrooms, reading some more, making more notes, writing a little more, and lots of chocolate. I have spent countless hours preparing what it is that I want to say about children writing with new technologies. I am exhausted. So too are the many friends and colleagues who have witnessed my struggle, asked for updates, talked through ideas, and provided feedback. They're exhausted too. What's interesting though is that the behaviours that I've described, if they were being presented to us from a child in our classrooms, we might be a little bit concerned about that gazing out the window, the walking around the classroom, the thinking about they've got nothing to say, screwing up pieces of writing. That's what I did, and I think I'm not a bad writer. The next thing I want to bring our attention to, the attitude that we bring to our writing is important. As hard as it was for me to construct this text and the different behaviours that I enacted, I knew I had to do it. I knew I had a time frame. I knew I had to share it, and I knew there were expectations for me. I had to get it done. Donald Graves wrote this: "What attitude is a child likely to develop towards writing when his written products are quickly removed from sight, placed in a desk drawer, sent home the same day, or simply buried in sheaves of dittoed exercises? Such treatment of children's writing products certainly does not foster the idea in children that their writing is permanent and unique. Nor does such treatment enable children to perceive progress in the ability to write over time." Let me ask you, how is it that we treat what the writing that we do and respond to? How is it that we treat the writing that children do? How is it that we respond to it? Is it something we love? Is it something that the children in our class love? Is it something we have to do, something they have to do? What feedback do we receive? What feedback do we offer to others? Thirdly, the issue of time. Donald Graves told us the importance of sustaining pieces over time, and when children do so, they certainly acquire a different understanding of the subject and what it means to know it well. They have time to read, take notes, listen to their information, and plan what it is that they need to do. And there's opportunity and need for children to revisit their work. So in the new ALIA publication that was launched last night, my colleague Jessica Manty and I have a chapter in there where we looked at 5-year-old Oliver and the talk that surrounded his drawings. In this particular study, we positioned ourselves at a drawing table in a community preschool, and we just watched what happened when children drew. And as they drew, we captured the talk that surrounded their texts. And in this particular chapter, you can have a look at some of the pictures that Oliver did and have a look at his accompanying oral composition as he was drawing those particular texts. I've had some opportunity to reconnect with Oliver, and together we've looked again at his drawings, and he has listened to the talk that we captured as he's looked at his pictures again. And so in being able to revisit his talk and what it was that he said about his pictures, Oliver has been able to use, sorry, this is going crazy on me. Oliver has been able to use these as a springboard into some other work where he's used technology to extend and elaborate on his initial ideas. So here you can see the 3 pictures that Oliver created. Let's see what Oliver did with these using the app Puppet Pals.
Once upon a time, there was a family who once went for a walk. They went to a walk to a school with the mum and dad. They let the 3 boys go to school. And when they got to the school, they said goodbye to their children. They went inside. They saw the teacher, Mrs. Click, and then they walked all the way back home to their parents. They went inside to have a cup of coffee. And in the afternoon, they came back. They walked down the street. And then they went back to the school. And then they got their children back. And then they walked back home together. The kids ran. And then when they got back home, they went inside. And then, do you know what happens? Then they all went to sleep.
Isn't it beautiful? So Oliver tells us that the topic's important. Life experience is certainly valuable and important in the lives of young children. Oliver was able to draw, talk, and create text about things that were important to him. His experiences were valued in his preschool context and given currency through time, where he was able to create his texts and able to revisit them as well as he built upon and extended his initial ideas. So as we look at the insights that Donald Graves gave us, it's useful to take a moment and think about what writing isn't. In 1976, Donald Graves and his colleague Becky Rule analysed the context of English textbooks. And from this, he wrote an article entitled "Textbooks, a Writing Process Evaluation." And there was enormous discrepancy between what Donald Graves defined writing as and the typical exercises that he contained within his books. Now today we're going to be doing a little dance as we look back to look forward and go through that movement. What I'm going to do here is share with you a little analysis I've done around some of the apps that are promoted on teacher blogs and some of the apps that are promoted in top 10 writing app lists. And as I have a look at what Donald Graves said writing isn't, I'm going to make a few little sneaky connections.
Once upon a time.
So Donald Graves said that writing isn't writing an end to a sentence. Nor is it about making lists. It's not about recopying a paragraph or a story. It's not only about putting sentences in order. It isn't about outlining and handwriting. It isn't about filling in blanks. It isn't about having closed responses. And what really challenged me is as I had a look at that list of things that Donald Graves came up with in his analysis of textbooks back in 1976, I was able to match things up to a lot of the apps that are out there in the name of writing. This certainly isn't what Oliver did when he recreated his texts. And I asked the question, what would Donald Graves say about the apps that are out there in the name of writing? I think he would provide the same information that he gave about textbooks all those decades ago. They are not responsive to children. They are unsystematic in their approach. They do very little to teach teachers about writing or the writing process, whether it's 1977 or 1983 or indeed 2015. I don't think it's apps like these that Donald Graves would want me to focus my attention on. Rather, I think he'd be more excited about what Oliver did with his drawing and what he did when he revisited it. It's a reminder, though, that the resources that we choose to use are so important to all phases of writing and text creation process. Donald Graves also presented a statistic that 95% of classroom interaction can be attributed to classroom material. And regardless of what that percentage might actually be, the power and place of resources in writing classroom is important. There is interplay between the physical objects, the building blocks, the plants, the science, the literary resources, the books, the apps, the exploration of language, storytelling, puppetry, reading, performing plays. My question is, where does technology fit within this? Donald Graves talked about the miracles of creation as children write, and he emphasised the importance of viewing these miracles from the perspective of the process the author engaged with, while at the same time accommodating the child's learning strategies or sequences of development, the reactive and reflective writers that Graves talked about. At this point, I'd like to move our conversations to think about those miracles of creation that can occur when technology enters the planning, composing and sharing phases of the process of text creation. I'm going to make a little change now with the language that I use. Instead of talking specifically about children, I'm going to talk about authors. While the majority of my work is focused with quite young children, the ideas I'm going to share could work with any author of any text, and indeed they're often strategies I use myself when I'm engaging in a writing project. So let's begin with thinking about planning the text. We know how important pre-writing strategies are, and we know that the pre-writing strategies can really help us with the awareness and understanding of who the intended audience might be, the purpose of the text, and something of its structural expectations. So remembering that a digital text has written, visual and oral components, there are a whole range of apps that we can be using to help authors create and share interactive and multimodal texts. So we know the importance of oral rehearsal, and Dyson has talked to us about oral rehearsal before as an ongoing accompaniment to writing efforts, and that's certainly the flavour of the chapter that Jessica and I wrote. We certainly saw the power of being able to record Oliver's talk as he engaged with his drawing. And being able to record that talk meant that he was able to go back and listen to it again to help orientate himself back to the text. When I was writing this address, I often recorded things that I was thinking, said them out loud into my voice memos so that I could go back and listen to it. There's a whole range of apps that we can use to help us record things in digital environments. Another strategy that we can be using as we're thinking about planning the text is concept mapping. Building upon an idea can really help us think about the visual representation of those key ideas and the relationship between and among them. And again, there's a whole range of different apps that we can use to do this, such as Poplet or Explain Everything. And I think they're really useful tools that authors can use and go back and revisit and help them to tease out their ideas. And here you can see a Poplet example that a Year 3 child created as they were beginning to explore their text ideas. Note-taking is important too. Being able to take notes can help us to organise and record our notes in clear and logical ways. And again, there's a whole range of apps here. As an example, Evernote can help an author make notes about a text, take photographs, create lists, record short voice messages, and these can be organised and shared with others as well, such as the peer or the teacher. Sometimes in this stage of planning the text, there's a need to get some additional information. And we've got Julie Quero here today, and she's talked to us a lot before about the online searching and the pitfalls that children can fall into there as well. This is a new app that I've come across, Instagrok. I'm not sure if many people are familiar with it, but it's really quite lovely in terms of helping authors to locate educational materials using search terms. And the way that the information is presented in Instagrok is in a dynamic visual concept map that identifies key facts, images, video and glossary that the author can make selections about and build their own concept map as they're unpacking the information that is there for them as well. So as we're thinking about planning the text, I also want to remind you that we're also needing to plan the text thinking about the different modes, thinking about the written information that we need, but also thinking about images and audio as well. So when we're thinking about visual images, I just wanted to share some reflections. With my colleagues Jessica Manty and Kylie Lipscomb, we've spent a lot of time in classrooms recently looking at what it is that children are doing as they're constructing digital text. And we can't emphasise enough how many times we've seen a child get completely lost trying to find pictures for what it is that they're trying to create. We've watched authors try to match a character with what it is that they had envisioned and ended up having to change their whole script because they couldn't find the image that they actually wanted. So with this in mind, we believe wherever possible, authors should be creating their own image, and we've had enormous success when we've been working with children in classrooms where they've actually used the camera facility on devices and created their own images within there. Alternatively, they can also draw and photograph images, as we saw Oliver do, and create some powerful photography poses as well for inclusion in the text. Again, there's some other apps as well, aside from the camera, that can be used. WeMe's enables the author to create and share unlimited avatars, and the author can use their own images within this or photographs and edit them to achieve the desired look that they want for their character. Telegami is another app that enables the author to create and share an animated video called Agami, and they can be customised and matched to what it is that the child wants to do. If we're also thinking about audio text, there's a whole range of ways that we can support children with audio, because it's an amazing, powerful feature of digital text, and it can certainly affect the viewer's interpretation of a text and attitude or mood towards what it is that's happening. And I'm reminded of Georgina Barton and Len Unsworth's article in AJLL not so long ago, where they did quite a lovely analysis of Sean Tan's The Lost Thing animation and looked at the music that underpins that. And what they found is that music triggers can evoke particular emotions and feelings, particularly when it's accompanied with visual stimuli. And with some understanding of some musical elements, authors can select or even compose their own creations to contribute to the overall intent and meaning of their text. So an app such as GarageBand allows a child to compose, but there's also a whole range of royalty-free internet sites where children can get some soundtracks as well. So if we're moving through the process of writing, we're now thinking about composing the text, and there's a whole range of ways that authors can create their text digitally. So the visual potential of print is certainly emphasised in digital environments as we think about the power of its font, the styles, the place and space it occupies on the screen. And an author's design of the visual aesthetic of written text blurs boundaries between what we understand about the visual and written modes and the role that each of those play in the text. So it's vitally important that an author remains clear about the purpose of and intended audience for their creation throughout the whole process, because their decisions pertaining to meaning and form does much to position the text. The words an author chooses, the text structure they decide to work within, and the way they organise their text for interplay between print and the other modalities, such as image and audio, forms the materiality of the text. And these are vitally important. So authors can incorporate their own images, drawings, photos, and music to enrich the meaning of their text. Again, I emphasise the importance of spending time planning and developing these elements individually as the authors plan their text. So there are a whole range of ways that children can be activating different apps in order to help them with this process. Apps like Book Creator, Creative Book Builder, Puppet Pals, blogging sites, other web resources are really powerful strategies that we can be activating at this particular time. Many of those apps actually have opportunities within them for the text to be shared. And we all know how important it is to have that audience and to be able to share a text with that audience at the end of the process. But we can also be thinking about sharing the text throughout the process as well, as we're looking at feedback. And if we think about feedback as the way, the drive that steers the author through the writing process, or as Mem Fox so eloquently said, the after-dinner mint of the writing experience, we need to think about what forms that feedback can entail. We think about Donald Graves' notion of the author's chair. What can that look like when technology comes into play? So using things like Apple TV and AirPlay or Reflector allows devices to be mirrored to a larger space so people can group around it and offer comment to each other. There's also opportunities for online publishing on the web. There's a whole range of different opportunities that exist there where children or other authors can be bringing their text into play in that environment to get feedback from others, or to certainly participate in competition or even offer their own feedback to other people. So we've had a little bit of a whiz through the writing process and thinking about it in terms of the possibilities for digital text creation there as well. Let's go back to what Donald Graves told us as we're trying to make some connections here between what it is that we need to be really mindful of. Children need daily rituals for writing. It's really important, and you can see Donald's words there. I've been struck by this at a personal level. A big part of my role is to write, yet so often it's the part of my work that misses out on its time allocation. I could never face a group of students unprepared, or miss a meeting, or not be available for consultation. Yet I find that I can easily skip lunch, and I can skip my writing time as well. So earlier this year, my family and I had the opportunity to spend some extended time overseas. And one of the things that we did while we were overseas was to visit Roald Dahl's Museum and Story Centre. And the image that you have there in front of you is Roald Dahl's workspace. This is where he composed so many of the books that we know and love. And you could actually, there was a replica of this space where you could sit in it as well and explore what it was like. So as I look at this image, I'm reminded of the big wing chair, the old suitcase that he used as a footstool, which isn't captured in that photograph. You can see the roll of corrugated paper that he put underneath his writing tray so that he could get it to the right angle. You can see the array of artefacts that are in that space that were all motivators for writing. There's, in the bottom mid-section there, you can see a ball. That ball is actually all the foil off the chocolate wrappers he ate while he was actually composing his text. And I felt much better about my own chocolate habits at that particular point. But what was really interesting and what struck me and will stay with me forever is that Roald Dahl wrote 7 days a week for 4 hours. Every day from 10 to 12 and 2 to 4, he sat in that chair and that's when he wrote. And I thought, wow, how amazing that he was able to create everything that he did with a dedicated 4 hours of writing time. But it worked for him. He stopped midway to have a lovely lunch, and he said that Norwegian prawns were his favourite. But it really struck me when I thought about Donald Graves' words. We need to have that daily time for writing. It needs to become a ritual, and it needs to become a part of our pattern. And for me, and the personal reflections I've already shared with you about my struggle to find time for writing, I've really adopted this, and now I get up at 4 o'clock every morning and I write from 4 a.m. to 7 a.m. because that's the only time in my house that it's quiet. And it's really working. I'm having a great time. So the importance of daily writing time is important. Set times, control, rehearse, completion. All things that Donald Graves told us about, and all things that a very famous author was able to activate in his practices. So let's just quickly revisit the mechanics of writing. And I was a little harsh about some of those apps before that I shared with you when I said those are things that writing isn't. I want to remind us all about Donald Graves' words around the mechanics of writing are best taught within the writing experience. So if you have a child in your class or a student in your class who needs something in particular, by all means, I think it's a great use to find them what it is that they need. But not everybody needs the same processes. Donald Graves talked to us firmly that skills are best taught within the context of the writing process, and that writers need to develop self-critical tools. So how is it that we can help children retain control of their language and develop the powers to evaluate what they have written? How can this be developed from the beginning, from the child's first attempts to write? And how can a foundation of self-criticism be developed that will be consistent with effective writing at any age? So as teachers, we have an important role in what it is that we need to offer to children in our classrooms. And children shouldn't be dependent on their teacher for the need to write, what to write about, how the writing should look, when to write, to whom to write for, and how the writing will be judged. I think we need to pass some of that responsibility back to children and really think about how it is that we can create communities of authors in our classrooms as they're working through these different processes. So, what might Donald Graves then say about new technologies and the opportunity and demands they offer to children as they create and share their texts? I think those earlier messages of energy, attitude and time still ring true. And I think we need to really emphasise the importance of time and routine that need to be associated with the process of text creation. I think we need to also really understand what a digital text is. And here I've drawn upon Kari Jewett's definition as digital text as complex multimodal ensembles of images, sound, animate, movement, and other modes of representation and communication. So, we need to really think about these in terms of the logical and powerful ways that children can use technologies to inform them and support them and develop the digital text that they want to create. We've talked a bit about process for text creation, and Donald Graves, I think, again, would remind us about the importance of process for text creation. So thinking about planning, composing and sharing phases of the process of text creation are probably components of the process that you're familiar with. And I hope that these models resonate with what it is that's happening. Perhaps our discussion of the writing process is alive and well in your classroom. Perhaps our discussion of these was a refreshing reminder. What is different about these, though, when technology enters the picture? And that's something that we need to think about. I'd like to share with you a text created by a child in Year 3.
I had my first visit to a Buddhist temple. While I was there, I saw a happy Buddha, but it was chained off, so I couldn't touch it. I had to look carefully. I realised there were lots of special objects and Buddhas at the temple, and the Buddhists had special relationships with them. At the temple, no one was rushed, they were calm. When I walked around, you could see people meditating. I think it's good to meditate. The community was strong at the temple because they all helped each other. I think it's good to help people. To be a Buddhist, you make lifestyle choices. One of those choices that you don't eat meat because they don't like killing animals. I did have a delicious vegetarian lunch at the temple. At the temple, there were lots of traditions, like the monks pray at 6 a.m. at the temple every morning. Prayer helps them focus on the rules and things that are important to them. I learned a lot from my visit to the temple about what is it like to be a Buddhist, and I was pretty impressed.
So in that text that you heard from a child in Year 3, it's 1 minute and 36, it's a digital text, but there's a lot of work that has gone into the process of text creation for this author. So this author began with an Instagrok search about the Buddhist religion. Perhaps you noticed that as the example that I shared with you earlier. And the child began with a Poplet concept map to start teasing out the ideas and key elements that he was thinking about as he was beginning to construct his text. Perhaps you also identified that was the example that you saw earlier too. He had an experience. His class went to the temple together on an excursion. He took some photos. He also sourced some images from other places, And then after doing that, he revisited his Poplet map to have a look at what it was that was there, and he added to it. He changed things. He reorganised different elements of it there. He then spent a long time preparing a written draft, and then when he was making his revisions to his written draft, he decided to move to the computer and engage with some word processing as he entered in his text and tweaked and made changes along the way as well. He then recorded his written script, looked back to his images and made some connections and edited it all together using GarageBand. So what an amazing amount of work went into a text that was 1 minute and 36 seconds long. So we need to then think about, well, what does the writing process look like when technology enters? The author certainly needs to have in mind the text structure they wish to create, thinking back to the different platforms that we've already spoken about. They need to think about what written text needs to be incorporated within the text. And not every digital text requires the same elements or same components here. But when I'm thinking about written text, I'm thinking about headings, captions, and the extended text that can exist there as well. They're also making decisions about the visual text that needs to be there, still images, animation, movement as examples. And also audio, voice, music, effects. And within each of those components of the digital text, the plan, draft and revise cycle is activated. So if you could imagine 3 really complex spirals happening together, that's what the writing process looks like when digital technology enters the picture. But what I think is really interesting is that the example from the Year 3 child that I just shared with you showed how apps can work together. So I think when we're thinking about writing, creating text with digital technologies, we're making decisions about what app supports that part of the writing process and how is it that the apps can talk together? How is it that they can work together to help children get to a final product? So we're thinking about notions of workflow when we're making decisions about what it is that we're using. And publishing happens at the end depending on what it is that you're doing, and not every text needs to be published, although I find that most digital texts seem to be. So the choice of the digital platform is really dependent on the meaning, and if any one of those areas, the written, the visual, the audio, falls apart, then meaning is lost. Things don't make sense. If the picture doesn't match or doesn't add to what it is that's being said, or if the colours are wrong, or the animation is distracting, it's not working. Which leads us to really think about what is the choice of tools. So our knowledge about the process of text creation and the multimodalities of digital text is critical to our writing pedagogies. And we need to think about what is it that we can do to help children understand the purpose, audience and text structure. What are the written, visual and audio components that come together? And how is it that we can help children to make the best selections possible to facilitate that process for themselves? So apps need to be connected to the text creation process, not the mechanics of the written language. I think children are far more powerful when they are able to use them for creation. We need to consider how it is that authors interpret and engage with the phenomenon of digital text creation and the pedagogical practices that we can employ to support those processes. So how is it that apps are connected to what it is that children are doing? How is it that we can provide them the time to really explore what it is that they need to do, remembering that the process of text creation requires that sustained time? And really, we can't emphasise that enough. So children, the authors, need to have specific and substantive opportunities to engage as powerful and productive producers of digital text. We need to reconsider what we know and think about language and communication and the process for text creation. We need to think about what is the opportunities that children have to control the topic, to have a clear sense of purpose for the text and a sense of who the audience might be. So writing in the digital environment is multimodal and poses implications to support all elements of the text creation process. So children, as the authors, they need to activate the writing process as they create written, visual and oral texts that work together. And the more that we examine the flexible and recursive ways that children can produce text with technology, the closer we are to understanding how powerful digital text creation can be and the wider learning opportunities that this affords. Thank you.
My name's Robin Cox and I'm the current president of PETA, and it's fallen to me the lovely duty of kind of almost breathlessly thanking Lisa for that talk. What's been really important for us is that, and for us, by that I mean Peter and Alia, who've put together this idea of honouring Donald Grove's work, is that I don't think anybody could have done a better job than Lisa has just done of actually honouring his work and taking it forward. Her talk about taking a dance backwards and forwards to think about what Donald's early work, and to use his work to draw our attention to what mechanics and writing and apps and things are. Outstanding. I'm sure the rest of us feel that. I've got a gift here, and yeah, perhaps on that note it's time to... I'm, as I say, a bit breathless, almost a bit speechless, because I think she's done the honour to that man's work, and I do wish that he is here with us today. And I think that's it. Nobody's coming to... Okay, there's a 9-minute transition to the next session, wherever you're going. Thank you. Outstanding.